My name is Joy Davidson, and I work with the Digital Curation Center, and the DCC leads Work Package 3 for FAIRsFAIR, and we focus on FAIR policies and practice. This session is going to look at the rules of participation for the European Open Science Cloud and consider how FAIRsFAIR is working to support their realization. The rules of participation underpin the policies, processes, and procedures required to provide assurance of openness, quality, and trust in the practices and services offered by EOSC. One of the main goals for FAIRsFAIR is to deliver the essential FAIR dimensions to the rules of participation. It's important to stress here that the rules of participation didn't exist when FAIRsFAIR started back in 2019. They have been developing over the course of the last couple of years. There have been several versions, and as they have evolved, FAIRsFAIR has been keeping an eye on things and feeding into their development so that we can be aligned with the rules as they progress. One of the things I wanted to stress is that the EOSC vision requires the participation of lots of different stakeholders. So we have end users, we have data and service providers, and there's an acknowledgement that within and between these groups, there is lots of different degrees of maturity when it comes to FAIR data practices. It's important that we realize that FAIR is a journey as well as a final destination, and there's no single route to becoming FAIR, but rather lots of steps that people can take to become more FAIR enabling. By becoming more FAIR enabling, we also believe that service providers will be able to be more compliant with the rules of participation and to become more active and engaged contributors to EOSC. So for the next few minutes, we'll have a look at some of the work that we've been doing in FAIRsFAIR over the last year and a half and look towards some of the ongoing work that we have in the year coming up. So first of all, I just wanted to provide a little reminder of what the rules of participation actually say. I won't go through this list in detail, but you can have a look at it. We will come back to each of these in turn as we go through the next few minutes. I think it's important to make clear that the rules are intended to be high level, simple, and lightweight. The rules apply to all of those interacting with or benefiting from the EOSC. And as I've noted before, this includes end users, resource and service providers, but also those developing software, tools, workflows, and training. So this is version 0.5 of the rules of participation. We have, as I mentioned, provided some feedback on the various iterations. And as we've looked at the rules, we believe that we are working to address most of them. There's one that we don't really think that we're doing that much to support, but we think for 7 out of the 8, we are working quite closely and aligned with the rules of participation. So for the next few minutes, we will take a look at each of the rules of participation and give you a flavor of some of the work that we're doing in FAIRsFAIR to support their implementation. It's important to note that the examples we're going to give are not an exhaustive list of what FAIRsFAIR is working on, but just a sample of some of the things that we're doing. So the first rule of participation is that the EOSC is based on the principles of openness and is as open as possible and only as closed as necessary. So for FAIRsFAIR, we definitely see FAIR as an enabler of open science. It's important to stress here that FAIR and open are not equivalent concepts. During our landscaping activity for Work Package 3 and 6, we found that the concepts of open and FAIR are often confused. There can be really good reasons for not sharing data, for example, for ethical reasons, for commercial sensitivities. And it's important to note that closed data can still be made fair. One of the recommendations that we produced in our D3.3 report made clear that we think that policymakers should require that metadata should be made available, making clear why any data that can't be shared, and to provide some sort of a rationale for that. Our landscaping work also revealed that it's currently really difficult to compare the coverage, and the content of open science policies. And as we're looking at the EOSC landscape, it's important to see what sort of open science policies are in place. And looking forward, one of the things that FAIRsFAIR is trying to do is to work collaboratively to try and define a common set of policy elements that should be included in open science policies, and how to describe these in a more structured way to support comparability of the content. In addition, this more structured approach to describing policies will support both human and machine readability. And this is certainly something that is envisaged with the EOSC landscape as identified in the Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda. There's an aim to try and monitor the open science policy landscape over the next few years to see how it's evolving. To do that, we need to be able to see not only that policies exist, but what is covered in the policies. So we think that the work we're doing will hopefully help to support the vision outlined in the SRIA document. So rule number 2, data in the EOSC will, as far as possible, be made available in accordance with the FAIR principles. I think it's important to note with this rule that there is no threshold for FAIR at this point. Nobody has decided what exactly that means in practice. The key with the rules of participation is really to be more open and transparent about how self-assessment of FAIR is carried out. So to this particular rule, FAIRsFAIR is working on object assessment metrics. We developed a set of 17 metrics that have been out for public comment for the past few months. These are a work in progress. They build on the work of the RDA FAIR Data Maturity Model Working Group, as well as others. But we do believe that these sorts of metrics are very useful in supporting the transparency around how fairness of data sets are assessed. We also, based on some of the work we did around the metrics assessments, built that into our Fuji tool, which is a programmatic way to assess the fairness of data sets. So we've worked so far with 5 trusted digital repositories to pilot the tool, and the source code is freely available in GitHub. So we know that a lot of other people are playing around with the tool as well, which is great. So we're continually trying to monitor how we can improve the interface and make it more usable. We've also been very much trying to align our efforts in trying to cooperate around the notions of certification. So we see that FAIRsFAIR is one of the front runners in trying to progress this collectively. There was a workshop held in November last year, and a workshop report came out not long afterwards that describes all of the various certification activities in the various EOSC-related projects. So some of the work that we're coming up with, as I mentioned, there is ongoing work to enhance the Fuji tool, and we are keen to learn from the experiences of people making use of it for fair data assessments. But we're also very aware of the fact that FAIR itself doesn't make any reference to how long data should be kept fair for. So we are working to try and promote the notion of fair over time in some of the work that we're doing with certification. To that end, we are developing the concept of Core Trust Seal plus FAIR, and we can maybe pick up on that in some of the discussions later. Rule number 3, the EOSC aims to build a coherent infrastructure that removes silos and provides integration of data and services. So in this respect, FAIRsFAIR actually has an entire work package that is looking at the interoperability, particularly semantic interoperability for repositories. We have a dedicated support program where we've been working with 12 repositories, and they have been testing an implementation of a FAIR data point to see how that might support interoperability. One of the things we'll be doing in FAIRsFAIR Work Package 3 is to try and package up some of the lessons learned with the repository support that is happening in Work Package 2 and also in Work Package 4, which is focusing more on certification. But we want to try and share those practical implementation tips on what works and what doesn't. We are also developing a framework for assessing FAIR services. Repositories fit within that concept as well, but this framework is definitely something that we see as filling a gap, and the work is again iteratively going forward. There have been a few versions of the report coming out, and the final report will come out in August next year. But the framework and the methodology, we think, are certainly things that will be of great assistance to anyone who is looking to become actively engaged as a service provider for the European Open Science Cloud. Rule number 4, the EOSC is based on principles of ethical behavior and integrity. So to this end, FAIRsFAIR has been doing quite a bit of work on developing data stewardship training in Work Package 6. This activity includes a module on ethics, integrity, and responsible research and innovation. We've run several of these data stewardship training events now over 2019 and 2020. Part of what we do at some of these sessions is to try and get the participants from organizations thinking about ethics and processes at their own institutions and how these might be better integrated to support workflows, and hopefully get this to be a more joined up process for the researchers. We've also been working to define a competence framework in Work Package 7 for FAIRsFAIR, and that also touches upon concepts of ethics and integrity as part of good research practice. Coming up, we are starting work now to develop model curricula, which will help to embed FAIR-aligned practices into university education programs so that researchers coming into the workforce have a better idea of some of these concepts and are more able to be kind of FAIR practitioners from the outset. So as part of this activity, there will be an implementation handbook, which will help different universities to uptake the model curricula. We're also looking to try and flesh out examples of good practice. We are referring to these as implementation stories. And one of the areas that we're keen to explore is some activities where we know that institutions are trying to integrate ethics processes into their data management planning workflows, and we think that there's great potential to try and show these examples as things that others might want to replicate. Rule number 5 is that EOS users are expected to be a community that fuel the EOSC with everything provided by the EOSC. From our point of view in FAIRsFAIR, this largely depends on being able to find and use FAIR data. To this end, we have partners in FAIRsFAIR who are working to adapt the FAIR repository finder tool within RE3 data, and to try and make that more usable for people who want to search for both repositories that meet criteria for being FAIR, but also to be able to then exploit the data that is held within these FAIR-aligned repositories. This work is ongoing. It is feeding into the DataCite Commons, and our recent report, Milestone 4.8 report, does cover a little bit of the planned activity, and we would suggest you take a look at that. We're also doing a bit of work to pilot metadata catalog integration. We've been looking to do this collaboratively with some of the cluster projects so that we can get a thematic input. And the idea is to look at the DCAT standard as a way of making repository metadata catalogs more interoperable. The work is continuing. It's just starting in earnest. We had the proposal for the integration that came out late last year. The pilot is starting to move forward now. And In addition to that, we've been looking at the relationship between DCAT and also DDI, CDI, and trying to see how these fit together. And this will certainly be something that we continue to explore during the pilot, which will run through the next few months, and a report is due out in October this year on the lessons learned. We'll certainly be sharing those lessons learned to the wider repository community and providing some tips to repositories that might want to make their metadata catalogs more interoperable going forward. So we've grouped together here rules 6 and 7. This is very much focusing on the behaviors of EOSC end users. And there's an expectation that EOSC users will adhere to the terms of use for the resources they use, and also that they will make reference to the resources that they use. Within FAIRsFAIR, we see that these rules really depend on researchers as end users understanding the general good practices associated with aligning with FAIR. So to support these rules of participation, we have come up with a FAIR Aware tool. And this really helps researchers and also data stewards to become more familiar with the FAIR principles in a more practical sense. They essentially get an interface where they work through 10 questions. The questions really help the researchers and, as I mentioned, data stewards to assess current practices, what they're currently doing, and maybe where they might be able to make some improvements. It's intended to be something that doesn't take a huge amount of time. I think it should take about 30 minutes to work through the 10 questions, but it will give people a general sense of what they're doing and where they might possibly be able to make some minor adjustments or major adjustments to become more fair. One of the good things about the tool is that hopefully as people work through it, they will probably realize that while they may not be calling their activities or practices FAIR, they may well recognize that a lot of the things they're currently doing do align with FAIR. And we hope that it is an encouraging tool as well as informative. So we see this as a useful tool for researchers. And some of the upcoming work, we are looking more at how the tool can be used by data stewards to be repurposed for training that is offered at the organizational level. To this end, we actually are taking part in one of the SHOC Train the Trainer boot camps in May to present a session on how the FAIR Aware tool might be used in this context. The results of that will be made visible through SHOC, but also through the FAIRsFAIR website. So that was a quick run through of the rules of participation and how we believe FAIRsFAIR is helping to support their realization. I think it's important for us to remember that FAIRsFAIR is certainly not alone in this space. There is a lot of relevant project work going on in the other infra-EOS projects. We do try to work closely with them through the EOS task force that have been set up to encourage cooperation, but also through FAIRsFAIR, through our synchronization force, where we have a series of 3 workshops that bring people together to try and ensure that we're supporting things in a more coherent and collaborative way. So what's coming up next for FAIRsFAIR is really the first year and a half of the project have been looking at the landscape, coming up with some recommendations and some tools to try and help people to put FAIR into practice. For the rest of the project, much of the efforts will be on supporting and guiding the rollout and take up of some of these recommendations and tools. One of the new things that we brought in over the last few months is some EOS readiness roadshows. These are intended to try and be run at a national level so that people can understand a little bit more what's going on at the national level and how FAIRsFAIR might be able to support activities. Another key thing for us will be to continue to engage with the EOSC governing bodies and the EOSC Association as they firm up some of the structural documents and rules of participation going forward. So that will be a key goal for us over the next year and a half, or actually the next year of the project. So I think that's been pretty much a quick run through of what FAIRsFAIR is doing, and we will open it up to some comments and questions a little bit later.